Of a presentation. We're running now against a very important time. I would like to suggest the possibility of us taking a break now.
No.
Coming back at 7 o'clock instead of 8.
No.
Because I know that you're going to try and cut us off again early. And,
no, I understood that you would
We have been compromising ever since we got here.
I understood that you would talk now after yesterday for about 20 minutes, and it would, so that would go, that would be okay, because we have time.
Well, when we first got here, when the case was submitted, it was for 3 hours. Then we got here, they said hour and a half. Now it's down to 20 minutes.
I understood that you talked yesterday already.
For about 15 minutes, and then the interpreters walked out.
Okay, so you see, that would be in a certain way.
That doesn't add up to an hour and a half.
No.
In any man's language.
I understood anyway. I didn't make an agreement with you. I thought that Jack asked you to talk to me about your presentation, but we didn't meet on that. But I got here anyway from Jack, with which you talked a message that for your whole presentation that was before yesterday evening, there were 30 minutes reserved. Anyway, all the time we are talking now about procedure is naturally from substance. And your proposal, which is, I don't think, not a proper thing to do, to talk on procedural questions in plenary sessions, your proposal to start tonight at 7 o'clock is not acceptable and not practicable, because we will meet normally at 8 o'clock, and translators and interpreters will be available at 8 o'clock, and then we will deal with the Panama case. So you have now 20 minutes.
Okay, with that colonial type of introduction, we'll try to proceed. Now you see why they got Manhattan for 24 guilders. Mitaki wipi. Meja inakstiji. Emie Lakota. My name is Bill Means. I'm an Oglala Lakota. I'm here to represent the International Indian Treaty Council and the American Indian Movement, a liberation movement that exists in the U.S. and Canada for the recognition and the freedom of Indian nations. The International Indian Treaty Council is a non-governmental organization at the United Nations. We've been working at the United Nations on a daily basis since September 1974. So the international community and these international forums are not new to us. We have been to many international gatherings, and we have presented our cases. Tonight we will deal in basically 3 areas. The Black Hills issue. We will deal with sterilization. And we have an attorney that was involved in the Wounded Knee cases, which presented a document in federal court regarding our treaty. Now, many of you saw in the program the item regarding the Lakota case, 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. What you did not see is that that case had been withdrawn. And I want to give some of the reasons, because I think the organizers of the tribunal and the examples of trying to get our testimony before this tribunal are evidence that it should be said, it should be heard. We were supposed to have a delegation of 5 chiefs and headsmen from our nation. Those are our diplomats and our presidents, and our executive branch of our traditional government. But because within the Russell Tribunal, and it's understandable to some extent, we had a lack of communication. Of course, we are across the ocean. And there was much confusion concerning the presentation. And it came down to 3 days before the Russell Tribunal was to begin. We got a call from some of the organizers. And they told us the case had been withdrawn, that they wanted to talk to some of our chiefs. So we gave them the number, and they called. And the chiefs had a meeting, and they decided that because of the confusion, because of the involvement in our internal affairs, and because of the fact that only one would be authorized to come to the Russell Tribunal instead of 5, what we call in our country, in our movement, window dressing, or tokenism, they were not allowed. They decided that they would no longer take that position in the international community, that if all 5 could not come, then nobody would represent the chiefs at this tribunal concerning the 1868 treaty. They said that the Treaty Council could come here and present documentation that had already been presented at various international forums, and for the Black Hills issue. And so for that reason, they decided not to come, and they also told me to tell the Russell Tribunal that they have waited 100 years for the recognition of that treaty, and they can wait another 100 years. And that when the Russell Tribunal convenes again, or ever attempts to convene, if they come to the United States, then they might consider coming, because they're getting on in years now and they do not want to die in a foreign country. So that brings us to our presentation here. We brought a delegation of 13 people. And for over 1 year, since the inception of the Russell Tribunal, we have attempted to raise money, and each member of our delegation paid their own way, because we knew the importance of trying to educate the international community. Because in our movement, we found out that there's 4 major enemies of Indian people in the Western Hemisphere. Number 1, of course, is the United States government and its policies of genocide, colonialism. Number 2 is the churches and the cultural genocide that they're responsible for, where they take a full-blood Indian in Brazil or on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and they cut off his hair, and they put a white shirt and a tie on him and take him into a school, bring him up to the blackboard, and they show him a picture of a white man up there with a white powdered wig on and wooden teeth and pedal pushers and silk stockings, and they say, "Young man, there's the father of your country." That's cultural genocide. That's the reason why we have challenged every single denomination in the United States. We have challenged the World Council of Churches. We have even sued the churches in the United States at one time for $1 billion. We took over a building in the National Council of Churches because they would not listen to us. And we initiated that lawsuit for $1 billion, 300 million of which was for gross violations of the 10 Commandments. Another 400 million was for alienation of ecumenical affection. And that's the story I just told you about the little boy going before the blackboard and being told that George Washington is the father of his country. And of course, the rest of the suit was for legal fees. So we move on to the other two enemies of Indian people. And that is why we are here today for this third one, education. We find that the educational systems around the world have tried to edit Indian people out of existence. And so we bring to you some new updates on the issues of Indian people in the Western Hemisphere. Because we find out that regardless of where we go in the world, the white man is totally scholastically retarded in the area of Indian affairs. He does not realize the contributions that Indian people have given to the various governments that exist in the Western Hemisphere. And of course, the fourth enemy, and probably the most profound today, is the multinational corporations and how they exploit our land and manipulate our people and destroy the environment. We have seen the colonialism perfected on our people in the last century now comes up in each and every single case today that's being brought before this tribunal by the Central and South American delegations. So you see, what was perfected on our people is being exported to Central and South America. And so we are thankful for the Russell Tribunal for allowing us to be able to get together with other Indian people in the Western Hemisphere, because we see that as a major value of this conference. Because we know that white people are not going to solve Indian problems. Indian people are going to solve Indian problems. It's called self-determination. And so when you come to our meeting, one of which we'll be having in Geneva, another one we'll be having on the White Earth Indian Reservation, northern Minnesota, we will allow you an hour and a half to give the Russell Tribunal report. That's a promise. We are here to talk about the Black Hills. What is the Black Hills? To the Indian, to our people, our nation, the Lakota, it is our birthplace. It is our church, and it is our burial grounds. And when people ask us, how come you are going to sell to the government? It immediately raises a kind of a rage within our people, because the Black Hills have never been for sale. Our mother is never for sale. If you think we would want to sell the Black Hills, then you should go to Rome and ask the Pope if he's willing to sell the Vatican for $102 million. You can go to Jerusalem and ask the Palestinians, the Jews, the Muslims if they're willing to sell Jerusalem for $102 million. And you know what they'll tell you? That you're crazy. That is what the Black Hills means to our people. To the white man, the Black Hills is the richest 100 square miles in the world. It has 37 mineable minerals contained within that 100 square miles. It has large areas of surface water and large areas of underground water. The ideal site for mining operations. The Black Hills was stolen from our nation in 1877. It's called the Black Hills Act. There's a specific provision. You see, the Black Hills is just one violation of the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. Because the chief said that the treaty will be their part of the presentation, we're only going to present through one of our attorneys the legal overview of that treaty and not give you the statement from our nation. But that treaty had an article, Article 12, that said that take 3/4 majority of the male population in order to abrogate that treaty. They never could get that 3/4 majority. So what they did was they sent in the cavalry. They sent in a man by the name of George Custer. We called him Yellow Hair. He had hopes of being president of the United States. He was known as an Indian fighter. But one day out there in, I believe it was 1876, we gave him what's called a sensitivity training session at the Little Bighorn. And General Custer made his last ride into Sioux country. And there's a story that the Indian people tell, about Custer. They said he was, highly considered for a presidential nominee. And he was in Washington making his rounds of the cocktail parties before he went out to control the Sioux Nation. And he said just before he left Washington, he told the Bureau of Indian Affairs, he says, I don't want you guys to do anything till I get back. And so that's why the Bureau of Indian Affairs hasn't done nothing since 1876. But you have to understand that we've compromised long enough in the Black Hills. The line is drawn in the Black Hills. We have put together a coalition with non-Indians and Indian people. And we're going to stop industrialization in the Black Hills. Because the question is not who's a communist and who's a capitalist. The question is, how long is the white man going to allow industrialization to rape our mother, the earth? So we have drawn the line in the Black Hills. Most of you know about Wounded Knee, 1973. And so if you hear about some activity, both politically, militarily, in the Black Hills of South Dakota, do not be surprised. And we want you to prepare yourself, decide what you can do to save the lives of Indian people that will be making their stand there, and non-Indian people, many of which have already committed themselves, because we found out that because South Dakota, that area of the country, is an agricultural state, the first ones affected are the farmers and the ranchers. And even though they surrounded us in Wounded Knee as vigilantes in 1973, as soon as they saw their wells drying up from test drilling in the Black Hills, they began to hang around our office and say, look, how can we stop these multinationals? 25 of the largest multinational corporations in the world have leases in the Black Hills. So you see, we're up against two different opposing ways of life. One is industrialization, and one is respect for all of life. So we have not come here to embrace American capitalism, or we're not come here to climb in bed with communism. We come here as Indian nations. We will survive. We have survived the most sophisticated genocide for the last 500 years. We look forward to the 1980s, because the American Indian movement is the only national movement in America that has survived the 1970s. And we're stronger than ever. And so I ask you to figure out your place in this fight. Do not be surprised at what you hear about. Do not be surprised about a struggle where people have to die, to sacrifice their lives for the Black Hills. Just decide what you're going to do about it. And with that, I would like to present some documents to the Russell Tribunal to look through, if they have a few minutes. One's concerning the Black Hills. We have two specific articles. One is called the Declaration of Continuing Independence by the First International Indian Treaty Council, 1974. Another one on the Black Hills. Another one on two documents on sterilization, and a report to the Russell Tribunal, continued genocide of Lakota people, corporate contamination of their water, October 1980. It says on the bottom, a nation is not conquered until the hearts of the women are on the ground. And with that, I present these to the Russell Tribunal, and I'd like to introduce Phyllis Young from the Women of All Red Nations, the women that have organized themselves within the American Indian movement to deal with international issues, to deal with health conditions, to deal with the preservation of our unborn and the preservation of our children. Thank you very much.
I'm Phyllis Young. I'm Hunkpapa Dakota, part of the Lakota Nation. I come from the land of Sitting Bull and Vine Deloria. I want to give you a brief description of the Women of All Red Nations so that you understand what we're all about before I present the sterilization data. Women of All Red Nations is an arm of the American Indian movement. We are women who are concerned about our survival. And though I am a full-blood, I believe in my traditional ways, my culture, and it was not traditional to speak as I am speaking here today. But we feel that it is part of our survival, that in order to communicate with European groups or organizations as they are, to have a label. So we organized, we gave ourselves a name because we wanted to work in a more organized fashion. We wanted to do a little more. We wanted to provide a little bit more direction for our movement. And we wanted to add that little more strength that we needed for our movement. And that's what the Women of All Red Nations is doing right now. We are involved in international community. We have traveled to many countries in Europe, the Middle East, Scandinavia, and throughout the United States. We are a national organization of women. We are dedicated to our people and our survival. Hopefully someday we can hold hands with all the nations throughout the Western Hemisphere. Because we have suffered every form of genocide, we have been facing the enemy from all fronts. and sterilization has been one of the most sophisticated forms of genocide against Native women. It's happening throughout the Western Hemisphere. And the Women of All Red Nations is committed to fighting against sterilization. The most serious front right now is the sterilization that is going on because it's programmed, and even our minds are becoming programmed. It's pretty close to 50% of our women that have been sterilized. Until a few years ago, the Indian birth rate was on the rise, nearly 3 times the national average. It was the fastest growing segment of the American population. Native people were finally rebuilding the population decimated by European disease and the U.S. cavalry. Numbers that had fallen from around 13 million when Columbus arrived to only a few thousand at the turn of the century. Today, there are approximately 1 million Indians living in the United States. Living on land previously thought worthless, but now highly valued for its natural resources, Indian people have watched their power grow with their numbers. However, in the last few years, the birth rates have dropped considerably, and some people are alarmed that the gains of the past may be lost during the next generation because of the sterilization campaign. The Lakota people have a 0 growth rate. This is due, probably half of it is due to the sterilizations. Today, this week, there are an average of 4 tubal ligations or sterilization. The surgical operation, there are 4 of them a week at the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Following the GAO report of sterilization of Native women, the Indian Health Service was very defensive in their response. There were many groups in Europe who sent telegrams and lists of people who were protesting against sterilization. The Indian Health Service responded to them that the General Accounting Office had misinterpreted. The Deputy Director of Indian Health Service Program Operations indicates that they did not accept the excuse of a language barrier. He further stated that there is even some question whether the Indian Health Service is included in the moratorium on sterilizations in the United States, since only those programs funded by Health, Education, and Welfare Department are supposedly affected. Indian Health Service is funded by the Department of Interior. Physicians are paid per sterilization, so they make several $100s every time they perform a surgery. The U.S. government and the corporate drive for Indian resources is becoming intense. 1/3 of the nation's coal reserves and 1/2 of the nation's uranium reserves are on Indian land. Pressure is put on tribes to lease our land to corporations, and with no kind of income, tribes are pushed into agreements. The pressure continues, and the sterilizations in weakening our tribes is a direct link with the corporate push for natural resources. The Lakota Nation, as I said, has a 0 growth rate. And as I said, it's due in part to the sterilizations. The other part is due to the contamination of water caused by a waste dump upstream from uranium waste in earlier years. There is high gross alpha radiation in the water at Pine Ridge, which is causing spontaneous abortions, miscarriages. There is a high rate of bone and reproductive cancer. The Women of All Red Nations recognizes that the United States government is operating on a worldwide scale. Most of the sterilizations are done through population control programs. The population crisis cannot be analyzed without an awareness of its history and the background of its promoters. Such names as John D. Rockefeller III, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, Louis L. Strauss, former Secretary of Commerce and Director of RCA, the Mott Trust, Stuart R. Mott is Director of U.S. Sugar Corporation and heir of a major portion of the stock in General Motors. And the Mellons, Alcoa Aluminum, Chrysler, Westinghouse, Bethlehem Steel, Gulf Oil have been involved in the Planned Parenthood on an international scale. Other such names as the World Bank operates under the guise of neutral, humanistic academics for the entire framework. In Colombia, the Rockefeller Foundation has given large sums of money for population centers. The Catholic newspaper El Siglo wrote that 40,000 Colombian women had been sterilized in return for small money payments. Promises of free medical services, free lipstick. The Association of Doctors in Brazil issued a statement in 1971 condemning the sterilization of 1 million women there between 1965 and 1971. There is a United States subsidized birth control program in Venezuela, which has only 27 people per square mile, while the Netherlands, with 927 people per square mile, has no U.S. program. One program pays the person who brings in a new case for sterilization. An advantage of this, says AID, is that it creates a network of informers and agents from among the people. U.S. agencies have made sterilization and forced birth control programs a requirement for receiving foreign aid. In 1969, Bolivia nationalized Gulf Oil's holdings. When Bolivia, with a population density of less than 4 persons per kilometer, refused to institute family programs, the World Bank, under American pressure, threatened to withhold all development loans. In Claremore, Oklahoma, the Indian Health Service Hospital, in July 1974, sterilized 48 Native American women. In 1973, 132 Native women were sterilized. What this means is for every 7 births, 1 woman is sterilized. Most of the women are in their late teens or early 20s. At the same time the sterilization campaign was being carried out, Indian patients are being turned away by the hospital on the grounds that there are not sufficient funds to care for them. One woman said she was so harassed by social workers and hospital personnel who told her she was a bad mother, that she drank too much, and that her children would be placed in foster homes, that she finally consented to the operation. Just as the fear of genocide cannot be understood outside the historical context, so too it is hard to understand the full importance of the sterilizations without considering the religious and cultural context. The woman suffers great psychological problems, as sterilization is much the same as rape to a woman. There is no extended care facilities for these women who have experienced the sterilization. And there's a saying among the Cheyenne people that their prophet prophesied to the Cheyenne, when you get toward the end, you will begin to become gray very young. You will marry even your own relatives. You may reach a point where you will be ashamed of nothing, and you will act as if you are crazy. The white people will be all over the land, and surely you will disappear. When our fertile mothers are narrowed down to just a few, will sisters marry brothers? It's very depressing, because what our elders talk about and what we have and what we know as oral tradition means a lot to the young people. And we as the women of all red nations, we believe that there is still hope for us, for our children. It is our duty to continue for their sakes, for our unborn generations. We do not believe that we are a conquered people. The history books never told my son the true facts, but I tell him, and I'm very proud of the fact that the Lakota people are the only ones that have ever defeated the United States government militarily. My son knows that. He's 10 years old. I want him to grow up to be proud. And we as mothers of our nations have that responsibility. We as mothers truly have to throw off the yoke of colonization, of alcohol. And because 3 generations of my people have been placed in boarding schools by both Christian and government agencies, we are very programmed people. And the women of all red nations feel that it is our responsibility to deprogram our women, to teach our children that we are families, that they are beautiful people. If we don't continue our struggle, if we don't continue our fight, then what the past generations have fought for will have been all in vain. I have information on sterilization. I have different pamphlets. Anyone who's interested in, you can stop behind there, and that's all I have to say. I have.
I'm sorry.